Chapter 2 It turned out that it wouldn't have mattered if the Lotus had sent screaming notifications of its presence throughout all nearby space. There were detectors out, of course, but they reported absolutely nothing as the Lotus moved on toward Planet 3. There was static from storms upon the planet. It grew louder as the survey ship approached. But there was no sign of anything alive. The Lotus cruised some 200 miles above seas and cloud masses and desert, photographing as she followed a search pattern that covered all the sunlit hemisphere. There were mountains in the tropics which by all the rules of meteorology should have had rainforests at their feet. They didn't. There was a river system which ran like the Nile for 1,000 miles or more, through deserts like those of Egypt. There should have been at least a ribbon of vegetation along its banks. There wasn't. Where it reached the sea was an enormous delta. A drone went down and reported temperatures and humidity and the composition of the atmosphere, and the radiation background count. One would have thought the records those of Earth. The background count was a trifle high 3.9 instead of 3.6, but there was 18% of oxygen in the atmosphere. The only oddity, there, was nearly a full percent of helium. When the drone came up it brought samples of soil and sea water. There was no life in either. The soil was mostly mineral dust, but an electron microscope disclosed abraded fractions of pollen grains and the like. The sea water sample had evidently been picked up by the drone's dredge from some shallow. There were tiny, siliceous shells in it. Plankton. They had been alive, but were so no longer. "I think," said Nolan, "that I make a landing. Right?" The skipper said crossly, "Yes. You're the best man for it. You noticed things. But I doubt you'll learn very much." He tapped the written report that the radiation background count was 3.9. It happened a long time ago. A long, long time ago. Then he said with a totally unsuccessful attempt at humor, "Try and find out that it was bug-eyed monsters, eh? It looks too much like Earth. I'd rather blame monsters than men." Nolan growled and went to prepare for the landing. 2 other men would go with him, of course. The _Lotus_ wouldn't descend. It cost fuel to make landings. Unless there was some remarkable specimen that a drone couldn't handle, the ship would stay aloft. So a drone took 3 of them down to ground, a second drone following with equipment. They had weapons, of course. Men never land anywhere without weapons. They had the material for a foam house camp. They had a roller jeep, running on huge inflated bags. It would run efficiently on anything from sand to swamp mud, and float itself across bogs or rivers. They had cameras and communicators. Nolan had picked Crawford for geology and Kelly for communications. They could get other specialists from the ship, if desirable. The ground where they landed was desert, nothing more. There were enormous dunes like gigantic frozen swells of sand. Sometimes there were miles between crests. They landed close to the mudbank's northern ice cap to avoid the deep gorges in which rivers ran farther south. On the first day they set up their camp. Mountains reared to the north of them, covered almost to their bases with ice. These they need not explore. Instruments would do most of the landing party work, in any case. But they inflated small balloons and sent them skyward, to learn about currents of the upper air, and Crawford took painstaking photographs of dune formations, and they set up a weather radar. They checked the water recovery from the camp's air conditioner. It would supply their needs. When night drew near, with all instruments recording, they watched the sunset. It was amazing how splendid and how magnificent a sunset could be. Not many men see sunsets these days. The 3 of them, aground at the ice cap's edge, saw enormous mile-long dunes reaching away as far as it was possible to see. They cast black shadows. Then glories of crimson and gold rose from the western horizon of this dead and empty world. There was ice and snow upon the mountains, and unbelievable tints and blends of colors appeared there. After a long, long time the light fell. Then there was nothing to see but the stars, and nothing to listen to at all. This world was dead. They went in their camp house and shut out the dark and the silence. On the second day, Nolan went in search of permafrost. Their instruments faithfully recorded everything they needed except such items as this. Nolan found permanent ice in a valley of the northern mountains. It was perpetually frozen ground which might not have thawed in 1,000 years. He dug down through surface ice to the permanently frozen soil beneath it. That soil was not desert sand. And preserved in it Nolan found the blackened roots of plants, and the blackened blades of something like grass, and even some small, indefinite objects which had been seeds or fruit. They hadn't died with the planet. They were far older than that catastrophe. But they were proof that once this world lived and throve. During what was left of the daylight, Nolan and Kelly went south to a river gorge and photographed it for the record. The river had cut a gorge a full 200 feet deep in the wind-deposited dust which was everywhere. There were now dry gullies which undercut the dune sides and at times dumped mud into the slowly flowing liquid of the river. There were no colorings save dust and mud. The river itself was mud. It flowed very, very slowly and without elation. They came back depressed. An airless planet holds no life, but it defies life to establish itself. A methane-ammonia planet fights the intrusion of men with monstrous frigid storms. But this world was designed for life. That it was dead was tragedy. Its rivers flowed sullen, syrupy mud which moved reluctantly toward the lifeless seas. Kelly wouldn't look at the sunset this second night. He went into the camp and turned on music. Crawford watched for a little while only. There were clouds. There were breezes. One knew that here and there rain fell in gentle showers which should have nourished grasses and flowers and filled the air with fragrance. But instead it fell upon impalpable dust and turned it to mud which flowed slowly into gullies and into rivers which were also mud and moved onward, until perhaps after years the soil would become part of a mudbank in the ocean. Nolan came into the foam-walled house and said shortly, "We'll finish up tomorrow and leave." Kelly said abruptly, "Nobody's made any guess about why everything died here. But we all know." Crawford said reflectively, "It must have taken a lot of intelligence to murder this planet. When do you suppose it happened?" 10,000 20,000 years ago, said Nolan. "The whole place must have been radioactive, air and all. But if they used cobalt the background count could be down to 3.9 in 10 or 20,000 years. We haven't," said Kelly, "seen any craters. Even the pictures from out in space didn't show bomb craters." "When everything died and turned to dust," said Nolan, "there'd be dust storms. There still must be. They'd cover anything. There was a terrific civilization in part of what's now the Sahara, back on Earth. By pure accident they found a patch of highway and a post house. Everything else is covered up. Cities, highways, dams, canals. And that's heavy sand instead of fine dust. The _Lotus_ found some shadows on a photo. They want us to look and see what cast them. We'll look at it tomorrow and then leave." Crawford said deliberately, "We three have had a preview of what Earth will be like before too long. I wonder if it would do any good on Earth to show them what we've found?" "It's being argued on the ship," said Nolan. "Some say we'd better suppress the whole business." Crawford considered. "The comms aren't a very believing people," he said slowly. "But our people are. If we report this, our people will believe it. But the comms can tell their people it is lies. Our people will want peace more than ever if they see what a war will mean. But the big shot comms will just take that as a reason to demand some more concessions, and more, and more. Like demanding to build a base on the moon." "I'm going to bed," said Nolan. He added ironically, "I hope you have pleasant dreams." He did go to bed, but he slept very badly. The others slept no better. All three of them were up before sunrise. They saw it. And to Nolan the coming of the light seemed somehow like an eager arrival of the new day, anxious to see if some tiny thread of green somewhere lifted proudly from brown earth to greet it. But none ever did. Or would. "We should be through by noon," said Nolan. They set out in the jeep. They abandoned the camp. They would abandon the jeep, too, presently, when they went up the ship that waited in orbit. They headed west, and Kelly took over the microwave set that sent a wide fanning beacon skyward. The _Lotus_ was in orbit now. Every 90 minutes she was overhead. She'd completed the mapping of the planet. Every square foot of its surface had been photographed from aloft. They drove. The ungainly inflated bags which took the place of wheels rolled unweariedly, at first over dew-wetted dust and then over the minor gullies which, so near the ice cap, were not yet gorges. They went on for 20 miles, and the abomination of desolation was all about them. "We shouldn't tell about this back home," said Kelly abruptly. "If the comm people saw it, they'd know that." No, his tone was ironic. National aspiration justified the risk of this. "But they wouldn't see it. And our people might look at it and decide that anything was better than this. But it isn't." Nolan said nothing. He didn't believe that the discovery of this dead planet could be kept a secret for very long. The mountains drew back to northward and the desert took their place. The _Lotus_ went by overhead, unseen. But it gave a message to Kelly. "We're on course," he reported. "The ship just said so. 10 miles more." In 10 miles they came upon a city, or what had been one. It was partly buried in the omnipresent dust. That is, they saw part of a city's remnants showing in the mile-wide trough between dunes hundreds of feet high. There were other remnants between two other dunes, and still more in yet other troughs beyond. Structures of stone had existed, and portions of them remained. They had cast shadows the _Lotus_ had discovered from Maloft. The stone remains were abraded by the dust-carrying winds of 100 centuries. Their roofs had been crushed when monster dunes formed over them. They had been re-exposed to the sunshine when winds moved the dunes away. There was no metal left. No glass. No artifacts. They had been buried tens or hundreds of times, and uncovered as many. There was nothing left but skeletons of stone which cast angular shadows, though their fragments were rounded by centuries of patient wind erosion. It had been a very great city, but Nolan made the only observation that could tell anything about its occupants. The builders of this city, he said tonelessly, use doors about the same size we do. And that was all they could find out. Presently. New York will be like this eventually, said Crawford. And Chicago. And everywhere else. Kelly spoke suddenly into the microwave transmitter. He said sharply to the ship, invisibly overhead. Yes. Send down the drone. We've had it. The council member from Brazil made an impassioned speech in the supposedly secret meeting of the Western Defense Alliance. He pointed out with bitter factuality that no past yielding to COM demands had gained anything. Further yielding would be suicidal. He made a fierce demand that the WDA present a united front against this fresh diplomatic pressure. That it refuse, flatly and firmly and with finality, to make a single concession on a single point. It was a good speech. It was an excellent speech. It and others like it should have been made a long time before. The coordinator of the Western Defensive Alliance nodded at its end. I agree, he said, with every word the representative from Brazil has spoken. I think we all agree. The practical thing to do, of course, is to send a combined expeditionary force to maintain the independence of Sierra Leone. This force should be formed of contingents from every Western Defense Alliance nation, and it should have orders to prevent the entry of COM troops into Sierra Leone territory. I do not think that anything less will prevent the extinction of another member nation of the W. Will any council member propose such action for a vote? There was a pause. Then babblings. It would mean war. It would mean atomic war. Tens or hundreds of millions of human beings would die over a matter affecting less than 200,000. It was ridiculous. Public opinion. The council meeting ended with no vote upon the matter. Without even a proposal on which a vote could be taken. 2 days later, COM troops from one of the African COM nations moved in and occupied Sierra Leone. A great many of its citizens were shot, some for opposing the new state of affairs, but some seemingly just on general principles.